BH05 Vampire. Bernice screamed and shoved her torch into the creature's face. It recoiled, hissing from the light, but not very far. It stood poised, watching her, and Bernice sensed it was nerving itself for a fresh attack. Shining the torch in its eyes, Bernice studied it while she groped for a weapon with her free hand. Most of its actual shape was concealed by the high-collared black cloak, but she could see that it was tall and skeletally thin. The face was long and white with glittering eyes, a pointed beard and black lips drawn back in a snarl over fang-like teeth. The odd thing about it was that it looked somehow familiar. Frantically, Bernice felt through her pockets and found nothing. Her blaster was still in her pack, back at the inn. Did blasters work on vampires, anyway? For it was quite clear that that was what this thing was. She was looking at a myth, a legend, and it was about to attack her. Her fingers closed on the wreath of flowers dropped by the village child, and the vampire sprang. Snatching out the flowers, Bernice thrust them into its gaping jaws. The vampire staggered back with a choking scream of rage and fear. Clawing at its face, it turned and fled, howling into the darkness. Bernice turned and ran the other way. Shining her torch ahead of her, she saw another ladder leading downwards and scrambled down it. She found herself in a small circular chamber with smoke-blackened metal walls. In the centre of its floor was a round hole, rather like a well. Bernice looked round hopelessly. Now what? A scrabbling sound from above made up her mind. She ran to the hole, slid over the edge feet first, and found herself whizzing downwards in a giant metal tube. She shot out at the end, dropped a few feet, and landed on hard, rocky ground. Picking herself up, she looked round. She was out of the rocket, but not, as she had hoped, in the open air. She was in a cave, a long, narrow cave festooned with stalagmites and stalactites. She could never remember which was which. At the end of the cave there was an archway, and in the centre of the arch was a black altar. Light was coming from the other side of the altar, dull, greyish light, but daylight all the same. Bernice hurried towards it. She stopped to take a quick look at the altar. It was as fascinating a cultural artifact as any archaeologist could wish to find, but Bernice was in no mood to make a lengthy study of it. It was made of black stone, and there was a shallow depression in the top, smeared with something dark and thick and sticky. Bernice touched it gingerly, sniffed her finger, and recognized the smell that had been in the tower, the distinctive coppery smell of fresh spilled human blood. Somehow she knew that this was where the girl in the tower's throat had been cut. She had been sacrificed. Shuddering, Bernice hurried on past the altar and found herself at last in the open air. She was standing on the edge of a huge amphitheatre, a bowl-shaped depression in the ground. All her archaeologist instincts told her that it was a burial ground. Bernice looked uneasily over her shoulder. There was no sign of the thing that had attacked her in the tower. Judging by its scream, she had done it considerable harm. The white flower was very like Earth's garlic. Wasn't garlic supposed to be poisonous to vampires? Surely it would stay in the darkness of the tower where it was safe. Even if it came down into the caves, it wouldn't venture out into the open ground, not in daylight. Bernice felt torn. She felt she ought to head straight back to the village and tell Ivo of her terrible discovery in the tower. But to an archaeologist, even an unorthodox and unqualified archaeologist, the lure of an untouched burial ground was irresistible. She stared up at the sky. It was hard to tell for sure on a strange planet, but surely there must be several hours before dark. She remembered Ivo's urgings to get back before the bats begin to fly. "Come on, Benny, a chance to make your name," she whispered. Papers, articles in learned journals, a book, then the Holovid series. Just a quick look. There was something projecting from the earth near the centre of the burial ground, and Bernice walked steadily towards it. It was a metal tail fin, rusted and corroded with age. The remains of the missing scout ship. At the edges of the depression, the earth was hard-packed and solid, but near the centre it was more and more broken up. There were cracks and fissures, some narrow, some wide and deep. There were sudden hillocks, irregular patches, as though the ground had been churned up some time ago. Grass and weeds grew more thinly over these disturbed areas. Bernice noticed other, more recent irregularities where the earth seemed to be newly turned. With growing outrage, she realized that she might not be the first here after all. As much for the principle of the thing as anything else, she fished pegs and string from her pocket and marked out a square of ground. Another pocket yielded a miniature digger's kit, trowel, hand fork, probe, stiff wire brush, all rolled neatly into a tool holder. Bernice began to dig. Instinct, or luck, had led her to choose exactly the right spot. Careful digging revealed the shape of a long, thin, segmented bone. Gently, Bernice brushed away the earth. She was looking at the skeleton of a finger that ended in a long, sharp claw. With growing excitement, Bernice went on working. She uncovered a second finger, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and finally the skeleton of a giant clawed hand. She sat back on her heels, considering. Presumably the rest of the creature was buried here. Using the hand as a basis for estimation, it must have been an animal of colossal size. Some now extinct beast, the planet's equivalent of a dinosaur or a mammoth. But it had been buried at the base of the tower, with an altar watching over it. An altar used for human sacrifice. A sacred beast, then, something the inhabitants of the planet both feared and worshipped. Carried away with the excitement of her find, all danger forgotten, Bernice went on digging. She uncovered an immensely long, straight bone, the equivalent of the ulna in the human arm. But the radius, the bone that should be connected to it, was missing. Some scavenging animal, perhaps? Bernice fished out a magnifying glass and studied the bone. The ligaments connecting the ulna to radius were not torn, but severed, cut through with a sharp tool. Bernice was outraged. Not only was she not the first, which was quite bad enough, but the site had been desecrated, vandalized. A potentially priceless specimen had been ruined, and who knew how much more damage had been done. She raised her eyes to check the site for further damage, and found that someone was standing over her. She raised her trowel defensively, and then saw with relief that the newcomer was a woman in an expensive-looking grey travelling cloak with a fur hood. She looked neat, elegant, and utterly composed. In a crisp, authoritative voice, the woman said, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" The voice, the manner, and, come to that, everything else about the woman got right up Bernice's nose. Including her appearance, no, especially her appearance. Bernice straightened up, very conscious of her muddy field boots, mud-stained jeans, and scruffy safari jacket. "I might ask you the same questions." "You might, but you'd be ill-advised to," said the woman sharply. "I know what I'm doing. You presumably don't, or you wouldn't be here at all." "I'm an accredited archaeologist, and I'm making preliminary study of this site, which happens to have been vandalized." Bernice went over to the attack. "Do you know who's responsible?" "Vandalized? How?" "Something's buried here, some immensely large creature." "I know that. What do you mean, vandalized?" "At least one important bone is missing from the skeleton. For all I know, others may have been taken." The newcomer was silent for a moment, staring not so much at as through Bernice. Abruptly she said, "An archaeologist, you say? Off-planet, presumably? This world doesn't run to such luxuries." "Luxury, indeed," thought Bernice Summerfield. "Supercilious bitch." "I'm on a grant from the Ellery Corp Foundation," she said, naming one of her old employers at random. "This is just a preliminary survey. We'll be mounting a full-scale expedition later." "Not if you've got any sense, you won't. The political situation here is extremely unstable, and there are other problems too." "Such as?" "You wouldn't understand if I told you. Are you staying in the village?" Bernice nodded without speaking. "I advise you to get back there straight away. It'll be dark soon, and this place isn't safe after dark. Get yourself off this planet, and don't come back." Unexpectedly, the woman smiled. "It's not always a good idea, you know, digging up the past." With a nod of dismissal, she turned and strode away. Bernice noticed for the first time that a grey horse was waiting quietly, reins dangling, at the edge of the burial ground. The woman swung herself gracefully into the saddle and galloped away. "I hate horsey women," muttered Bernice. "One of the local aristos, no doubt. Thinks she owns the place, and probably does." She looked up at the sky, realizing it had got suddenly darker. "Still, I think I'll take her advice about getting back to the village." Giving the blood-stained altar a wide berth, Bernice made her way back to the front of the tower and set about retracing her route. It was in the woods that things got seriously nasty. It was really dark between the trees now, and Bernice could see shapes gliding and swooping in the shadows. Bats. Suddenly, she realized that there was a dark cloud of them above her head, and the cloud was getting thicker. The bats were making an odd, high-pitched, chittering sound. They started diving down at her, swirling about her head, and Bernice felt a sudden irrational fear that one of them would get caught in her hair. She started to run, pounding blindly along the forest path. The chittering rose higher. A bat flew at her cheek, and she felt a stab of pain. Still running, she flapped wildly at it. She rubbed her hand to her cheek, and it came away wet and sticky. "Blood," she thought. "Maybe they can smell blood like sharks." She ran faster, gasping for breath now, and suddenly she shot out of the woods and into open ground. She ran on, hoping desperately that the bats wouldn't follow. To her vast relief, she heard the chittering sound dying away behind her. Still running, she glanced over her shoulder at the darkening woods and turned back to find a giant shape looming up in front of her. Before she could check her pace, she ran straight into it and bounced off the solidly reassuring form of Ivo. For a moment, she could only look at him and gasp. "Lady Bernice," he said in astonishment. "In person," gasped Bernice. "Thanks for coming to look for me." "I'm glad to have found you, my lady," said Ivo solemnly. "But in truth it was Gerda I was searching for." "Gerda?" "My helpmaid. She's been missing since last night." "Was she a tall girl with long fair hair?" "Indeed she was," he broke off. "You said was, my lady. I think you bring me ill news." Bernice couldn't reply. Ivo took her arm. "We had best return to the inn. You can tell me there." Ivo insisted on settling Bernice in a chair by the fire before he would let her speak. He gave her a cup of rough red wine, and Bernice swigged it gratefully. Then he said, "If you are ready, my lady." She told him everything that had happened. Her exploration of the tower, finding Gerda's blood-drained body, the creature that had attacked her, the strange woman at the burial ground. As Ivo listened, despair settled on his face. When she finished, he said, "The one who attacked you, what did he look like?" "Tall, bearded, glittering eyes." Suddenly Bernice remembered. There was a portrait of him in the throne room in the tower."
"Lord Zargo," said Ivo. "Perhaps the strange woman was Lady Camilla."
He put his head in his hands and groaned.
"It is true, then. They cannot die."
"Who can't?"
"Lord Zargo, Lady Camilla, Orkon the High Priest. The old lords have returned to rule over us."
"But you said they'd all been destroyed."
"They cannot be killed," whispered Ivo. "They die only to rise again. They are vampires."